Hello, my name's Tom Palmer and I'm a children's author, and this is my Holocaust Memorial Day assembly or message for 2022. I'm the author of After the War, which is the story of a group of children who survived the Holocaust and came to live in the UK as refugees, and it's based very much on the true stories of Holocaust survivors I've listened to, met and talk to. And during this brief message for 10 minutes or so, I just wanted to talk to you sort of about my idea of why we mark Holocaust Memorial Day and why I mark Holocaust Memorial Day and why it's become increasingly important to me. I suppose the two main things are to remember what happened during the Holocaust. That's one of the reasons. And the other reason is to educate ourselves even more, to understand what happened in the Holocaust. And those two things together for me, I think, are really important. Because if we remember and if we educate ourselves, we can know what happened in the past, and we can hopefully do our best to do as much as we can to stop it happening again, and when it does happen again, to try and prevent it going any further. So that's this is my Holocaust Memorial Day message, to sort of get that across. I suppose in writing After the War, so I was brought up on knowing what the Holocaust was about. We touched on it at school, and then when I was 17, I read about it in fiction and in non-fiction. I watched TV documentaries about it, and I learned a lot about it. But still, I felt when I started to read this book, I knew some things, but there was a lot of things I didn't know, and a lot of sort of errors in what I knew. So I realised that in writing this, I had to strongly educate myself. And as I did, I learned a lot of the things that happened in the Holocaust, and I did that by reading books, by watching films, by meeting Holocaust survivors, by interviewing them, by going to places like Auschwitz, and soaking up as much as I could to really understand it. And it brought up questions for me and confusions, and then I talked to people who were much better educated than I was about the Holocaust, and they helped me understand even more. And some of the books I read a lot of fiction. So I've read books like Once by Maurice Gleitzman and I Am David by Anne Holm, and I learned a lot from those. I read Anne Frank's diary, which I'm sure many of you have read, which is very much one of my favourite books, and I learned a lot from that. And I also read other people who witnessed the Holocaust, because this is the story of Anne Frank, and she tells her story until, tragically, horribly, she stops writing her diary because she's been taken away and murdered by the Nazis during the Holocaust. But I've also read these two stories of two men who were boys, roughly the same age as Anne Frank at the time, who survived the Holocaust, and they came to live in this country as Holocaust survivors. And I read their stories, and that's what informed After the War. And I read about the things that I read about, the terrible things that I learned about were what happened when the Nazis invaded, what they did to the Jewish people, how they took their possessions off them, took their homes off them, drove them all into small areas of the city, and walled those areas up, which were called ghettos, and made thousands of people live in buildings that were only built for dozens of people. And those conditions that were in, as well as being enslaved, I learned then that they were taken by train to concentration camps, were murdered, some were forced on death marches, and all the other things I learned about in these stories. There are so many things to learn about that I needed to understand before I wrote this book. But in doing that, I really feel like I understood a lot more, particularly because I was able to ask questions of the Holocaust survivors that I met, so I could really get straight in my mind what the Holocaust was, and what Nazi Germany did, particularly to the Jewish people during the Holocaust. So, and that went into this book, and all those stages that I've mentioned, like the occupation, the invasion of a country, of Poland in particular, in this case, the ghetto, the slavery, the death marches, and the concentration camp. That all goes into this book, and this book's written for sort of year 6 and upwards, and it's dealt in a way that's appropriate for that age group. So I learned all those things, but I also, in learning about the Holocaust, learned other things as well. And when I'm writing a book, I do a notebook. So I keep a notebook with all the things I find out in it so that I don't forget them. But I also keep a scrapbook. And in doing all that research and finding out things I need to find out, I found out about some of the Holocaust survivors who came to this country as refugees. And I found out what it meant to them, having been refugees from concentration camps. I found out what it meant to them to come to this country, and how that they were positively received by the local people, and how much that meant to them. And I've also met some of the local people who lived in this country when those Holocaust survivors arrived here as refugees, and we have refugees coming to this country now, as we did 77 years ago at the end of the Second World War and before that. And I met people from this family and they lived in the Lake District, which is where my book is set. They lived in the Lake District when the Holocaust survivors arrived on their estate. And they've told me lots of stories, particularly the girl there in the middle with the dog on her lap. She's told me lots of stories, because that's Joyce, and this is Joyce now. And she's told me lots of stories about what it was like when the Holocaust survivors arrived. And reading their stories as well has really helped me understand what it was like for those, basically, children who came to live in this country as refugees, mostly orphaned. And in learning all that, I've learned that in that situation, those Holocaust survivors were treated pretty well by the local people, including Joyce and her family. And it's taught me that, as well as the horror and the appalling things that happened during the Holocaust, there is hope when people need help. When refugees come to this country and need help, there is hope, because many people are willing to welcome them and help them when they come through a horrendous situation like that. And I learned other things as well when I was studying the Holocaust, that particularly Ben Helfgott, who is a Holocaust survivor and is still with us, and he came to this country. He became a British citizen, having been a refugee, having been in a concentration camp, and he became a weightlifter, and he became a UK citizen and was a weightlifter for Team GB. In the Commonwealth Games, he won medals, and he competed in the Olympics as well. And I just think that's a fantastic story, even though all the terrible things that I know that he's been through. I know that he came to this country, and with the help of people in this country, built a life. And in finding out all those things about the Holocaust, that's what I think about. And there's a lot there that I've talked about, but basing it around these real people, I have educated myself. As I said earlier on, I've educated myself into what the Holocaust was, what happened to Jewish people and others during the Second World War. And as well as that, I've learned what happened when they came to this country as refugees, how when refugees are treated well, these two guys could thrive and come to this country and build new lives. And the thing that most impresses me about them is that they've spent their whole lives trying to help refugees from other countries, trying to fight anti-Semitism and trying to prevent genocide happening. And after all they went through, their guiding principle, it seems to me, from having read their books, is to try and make sure that we are educated, which is why I'm so pleased to have read their books and met them, and that we remember what the Holocaust was, for the various reasons that I mentioned earlier on. Anyway, can I just say thank you very much for listening to my short talk, and thank you to you and your teachers for engaging with Holocaust Memorial Day. I think it's really important, and I hope I've expressed why I like to mark it, and I hope whatever you do today to mark it is meaningful to you also. Thank you very much for listening, and all the best, all the very best to you and your families as well. Thank you.